And thanks again for everyone for joining us today. My name is Hannah Brunel. I'm a planner with the Southern California Association of Governments. And we're really excited to host this Toolbox Tuesday today to share some great local examples of quick build projects from a variety of local contexts, which we're really happy to showcase, ranging from larger cities to smaller cities, all across Los Angeles County. And we'd love to know who is joining us today. So as you're joining us, please enter your name and the organization or agency that you represent into the chat. We'd love to know, who's with us today. And so now I'd like to introduce my colleague, India. So she will share some brief announcements and also some housekeeping items.
All right, thanks, Hannah. So before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that nominations are now open for the 2021 Skag Sustainability Awards. And so every year we honor planning projects and plans that advance sustainability in Southern California, specifically the counties of Imperial, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura. And so the applications are due on February 26th, and categories are active, healthy, and safe communities, alternative fuels and infrastructure, efficient and sustainable land use. Then we also have Green Region Initiative and housing innovation. So I'll put the link to the application page in the chat. And it's also on the screen in the last bullet. And if you have any questions, you can also email me at brookover@skag.ca.gov, which I'm also putting in the chat. And so also want to go over just some quick housekeeping items before we start. So just so everyone's on the same page, this meeting will be 2 hours long. It is being recorded. All participant lines are muted. At the end, there will be a Q&A session. And if you have a question during the presentation, please type your question into the chat box or press the raise hand function, and we can call on you during the Q&A. And then for the chat questions, we'll log all questions and then voice the selection at the end of the presentation. And finally, a recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint slides will be available on our website, and we will email everyone who registers for this a link to those materials. So without further ado, we can take it away, Hannah.
Great, thank you so much, India. Alrighty, so I'm happy to introduce our agenda for today. So first we'll have Sam Corbett, Principal at Ulta Planning and Design. He will be presenting on their new quick build guide in collaboration with the California Bicycle Coalition. And then we will be having a panel on local perspectives on quick build projects. So we'll be hearing from the city of Long Beach, city of Culver City, Glendora, and the city of Pomona. And then we'll dive into a Q&A session. We'll start with a couple of guided questions, and then we'll get into audience Q&A. And as India mentioned, you can feel free to type your questions into the chat as we go, and then we will read those out once we get to the Q&A session. And I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Sam Corbett of Ulta Planning, and I will stop sharing my screen so you can bring up your presentation.
Hey, thanks, Hannah. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it.
It's good? Okay. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm glad to see that we're having some people join from outside of the Skag region, too. That's exciting. So yeah, I'll be presenting on a quick build guide that, as Hannah mentioned, we developed this summer in partnership with the California Bicycle Coalition. And I put a link to the full guide. It is a 80-page document, so I'll really just be providing a high-level overview of what's in the guide as part of this session. But I certainly encourage you to go to the link there on this slide, as well as in the chat box, and you can download the guide for free if you want to sort of dive deeper and find out all that is in there. So what is quick build? The way we've defined quick build in the guide is that it is about delivering projects on a shorter time scale using lower cost materials. You know, I say shorter than sort of the normal design engineering process that is typically required. I should note though, we do differentiate quick build from, say, demonstrations or tactical urbanism, sort of what Skag refers to as go human projects, in that quick build projects are intended to stay up for a longer duration of time. You know, typically demonstrations are up for a day or a weekend or even a week, whereas quick build projects are really intended to provide safety improvements for pedestrians, bicyclists, et cetera, for a longer period of time, you know, months, even years. So why quick build? I think this is probably obvious to all of you on this call, but you know, this is really an opportunity that's particularly appropriate during the pandemic, in that we're providing, you know, more space, quickly improving facilities, safety, comfort, connections for active transportation users who sort of need more space. We're also seeing a big increase in a lot of communities in terms of recreational walking, cycling. People are stuck at home during sort of stay-at-home orders, and it's one of the few activities that people can do safely, in compliance with kind of social distancing regulations. But the other part of quick build is, even beyond the pandemic, this is a great tool and approach that can be used to sort of quickly roll out a city or county's transportation network. And one of the key things too is that communities can experience a facility much sooner, and then also provide feedback, and that there's a great opportunity for a city to respond to that feedback and sort of quickly making changes and adjustments to the design. So we have a whole chapter in the quick build guide on sort of how to do this, and it covers everything from sort of how to assemble your team. Part of it's kind of putting together a really tight team that has a project manager, a project leader, that really champions the project and sort of drives it through all of the administrative kind of procedural checkpoints and approval processes. A lot of it has to do with also sort of assessing your resources and your capabilities within your agency, making sure that you're augmenting it as necessary, whether that's using an on-call transportation bench that you may have, whether you're tapping into other resources or stockpiles that you can access either through your city or agency, or even through community resources that may be available. And then obviously funding is critical too, and really advocating for more funding as possible. I think one of the key points that we make in quick build though is that it should really still follow all of your transportation planning best practices. And I guess what I mean by that is that sort of all the hard work that you've already put into your approved plans, which have already included a lot of outreach, consultation, public approval, through your governing board or governing agency. Those should really be your guiding principles for implementation of quick build projects. So this isn't really the time to throw any of that out, but really bring that forward. And quick build provides an opportunity for quicker delivery and implementation of the plans and the networks that you already have in place. Also provides a great opportunity to advance your vision for safer, more equitable streets. So when you have areas or disadvantaged communities or areas that haven't been represented or haven't been provided necessary resources in the past, Quick Build is a great opportunity to address that inequity by providing sorely needed transportation improvements to those communities. And again, it's a lot of best practices here, making sure you're connecting key destinations, particularly during the pandemic, making sure that all essential workers are able to get to their places of employment, that you're connecting schools, that you're connecting healthcare facilities, other critical destinations within your community. There is a whole chapter on material selection, and I'm only going to sort of briefly touch upon this, but this is a very important part of Quick Build. I think some of my fellow panelists will also cover this. But material selection is important in that, one, it determines the overall duration that a project will last. And two, it can also influence the public's perception of the project. So, give this enough attention and consideration in the Quick Build process. I'd say another key point of material selection is a lot of it has to do with the adjacent traffic conditions. So obviously, if you're planning a project adjacent to a higher traffic facility, you'll need more durable materials to provide more of a buffer or vertical separation between the active modes and the motor vehicle traffic. And then also depending upon the materials that you choose, that'll determine sort of how you can install it. And while volunteers may be able to be used for some, quicker materials like tape or paint or cones, you'll need to get professional assistance if you need equipment for installing more durable materials like a jersey barrier or something of that nature. So when to do it? Well, now's a good time. These are certainly sorely needed facilities. And as I mentioned, people require more space. And really, I think that what we sort of laid out as the vision for Quick Build in the guide is that this is the opportunity to really quickly advance a city's transportation network so that you can have facilities in the next year or a couple of years rather than waiting the typical 10 to 20 years to implement a transportation plan. So yeah, sooner is better, but the other part is that we expect that a lot of city budgets will be constrained and will be impacted by the pandemic and associated sort of economic recession for more than a year or two. So I think that this is still quite a viable and effective approach for delivering projects really for the next couple of years. And then I just wanted to briefly touch a little bit upon engagement before wrapping up. So certainly engaging with the community. I think that the thing with Quick Build is you don't always have your typical longer engagement periods because you're trying to get it in quickly, but the actual project itself is a form of engagement and a form of getting feedback and input from the community. And one of the things we have found on several projects is that it's really critical to identify key stakeholders throughout the community, whether that's local residents, business improvement districts, perhaps local businesses that may be impacted by the project itself, maybe a loss of parking or things of that nature, and really make sure that you take a targeted approach in engaging with those groups, because if they are not engaged, they may be the ones that are most vocal and maybe opponents of the project, particularly if they didn't have an opportunity to weigh in on the project and the design and the actual sort of key elements of what's in the quick build project. And then I guess lastly, make sure that there is a very clearly communicated point of contact for the project, so that sort of as concerns arise or there's discussion in the community about the project, it's very clear who people should be going to for any feedback or input on the project. And I guess one of the key things that we see with quick build projects is, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes there's just one aspect or one element of the design that people have concerns with. And quick build provides that opportunity for sort of quick modifications and sort of in-field changes to that design to address some of those concerns. So certainly keep that in mind, and by making those changes and responding to public input, you can really, I think, influence public perception and the overall success of the project. And then lastly, just post-implementation, make sure that you have some mechanism for evaluating the project, whether you're collecting quantitative data or qualitative data. That really is your currency for evaluating success. So certainly like online surveys, doing some pre and post implementation counts and other kind of evaluation techniques can be really effective for assessing the overall success and effectiveness of the program. And then also other programming elements. So if you have some other, whether it's events or complementary programs like bike share or increased bike parking, that after implementing and rolling out these quick build networks, it's a great opportunity to come in with those programming elements. So that concludes my presentation. And I think at the end, we're going to hold questions to the end. So I'm just turning it back to you, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sam. That was an excellent presentation and a really great primer for our panelists. So first up, I'd like to introduce Ricardo Light to share a little bit about what the city of Long Beach has been doing and about their process for quick builds. So Ricardo, if you want to share your presentation.
Hello, I'm Ricardo. I'm a transportation planner with the city of Long Beach. And well, as with a lot of cities, we had to respond during COVID back in March. And we started an open streets initiative, which kind of included 3 separate elements. One was outdoor dining, but also just outdoor space that businesses. And I say that because we kind of expanded beyond dining after a while, once we realized that other sorts of businesses also needed space to operate in. Neighborhood open streets was another element. It was basically just kind of trying to limit the number of traffic and also reduce traffic speeds on certain neighborhood streets to encourage folks to use their neighborhood streets to be active, or even kind of pass someone on a sidewalk if they're trying to social distance. And then the third element was curbside pickup zones and signs. And this was to kind of alleviate a lot of the demand for curb space, since there was a big increase in to-go orders, especially in our restaurant corridors and whatnot. And that sort of included also repurposing a lot of our curb space to yellow zones or 20-minute parking to kind of just help increase turnover in high demand areas. So when we first started our Parklet program, this is what I'll be focusing on mostly, is the Parklets. we initially started with restaurants. That's where the demand came from. After about a couple months, we got requests from salons and barbershops, even gyms. So kind of a greater variety of businesses. And we slowly started allowing other businesses to get these parklets. And so really the process would be they would fill out a kind of consent form that basically just said, hey, this is my business, this is where I'm located, I would like the city to install a parklet. And for the first few months of the program, it was that simple. A business could request a parklet and have it installed probably within the same week. Most of the demand really came around the 4th of July. A lot of restaurants wanted parklets before that weekend. And we worked about 3 days. I was out, myself, my colleague, and our public works crews were out for about 3 days straight, working about the full day, doing kind of same day requests for parklets for the 4th of July weekend. It was very busy for us. A lot of really what we considered for parklets, traffic safety is really kind of the main priority. So we wanted to keep these off of any street that had a speed limit above 25 miles an hour. Just because these K-rail, they're typically used for construction sites. They're very temporary. We did not feel comfortable putting them in kind of high speed areas, knowing that they were meant to have people sit in these spaces. So speed was a big factor. Roadway width, maintaining, kind of a minimum of 11 feet of travelway for the parklets was really important. And then businesses as well. If a business wanted, some of these restaurants are pretty small. Some of them have frontages that are 20, 30 feet, which once you consider social distancing, doesn't really allow for very many tables. So oftentimes, you'd have to ask a business to get permission from their neighbor to kind of expand their footprint out in front of neighboring businesses. And then utilities is really kind of the last one, working with fire and other local utility agencies, just to make sure that we're not impeding their operations as well. So some of the challenges that we encountered really were, we had big, huge surges in demand, especially kind of approaching the 4th of July. We started the actual parklet program at the end of May. And we didn't really have a huge supply of K-rail sitting around, understandably. So I think the city of Long Beach probably bought up the majority of these plastic K-rail in the Southern California region. Our special events department, which handles a lot of event spaces on private property. So like if a restaurant has a private parking lot that they want to use for dining, they would go through not public works, but through special events. A lot of businesses that were looking to get K-rail to protect their parking lots were unable to because the city had actually bought a lot of them, unfortunately. So that was a big challenge there, was just procuring enough K-rail to meet the demand for parklets. Collisions too, I would say in August, we had our first parklet collision. It was about 2 a.m, so luckily no one was hurt. We've had about 4 parklets that have had involved in collisions. Still no one's been hurt. They've all been kind of late at night. Luckily when no one is in there. And we've had to modify the parklets a bit as well. Drainage was something we didn't really consider in the summer months, especially with trying to meet the kind of surge in demands. We hadn't really thought through the fact that it might actually rain. We also didn't really anticipate this to go on for so long. I think back in March and in May, we were all thinking restrictions would only last maybe until fall. Now these parklets have been out there for quite some time. So we've kind of started having to address certain modifications, like for stormwater, and even some of the utility companies are finding that we actually did indeed kind of impede on some of their operations, like covering valves, and just some things just went overlooked in the rush to kind of meet the demand to have these parklets installed. And so, yeah, most of these were designed in the field. We tried to kind of design them beforehand as requests were coming in, and then we had so many coming in a day. We just had to go out with the crews, trailer fulls of K-rail and install these in place. Eventually, bars started requesting these. But because of our health department, we weren't able to provide them with parklets until about October. I believe we had our first couple bars where we installed parklets, and they would partner with restaurants to have food. That was the condition. However, because of the surges in COVID, that didn't really last really long. So we actually haven't had in-person dining, even outdoor dining, for some weeks now. We also had a NACTO grant back in July that helped us kind of do more outreach to lower income restaurants and businesses. We found that the majority of demand initially came from a lot of the more affluent neighborhoods and business corridors. And so we were really trying to promote this program for a wider range of businesses. And it wasn't as successful as we would have liked, unfortunately. There were a lot of factors that we didn't consider that a lot of these business owners brought to us, such as, safety concerns for their patrons. They were worried that, patrons sitting kind of in the parklets just might be exposed to harassment or having things stolen, just kind of in these crime prone areas that we hadn't really considered before. But we were still able to help about 4 businesses, which isn't much, but it's something. And we've received mostly positive feedback for the program, so much so that because of these temporary parklets, actually a lot of these businesses, probably about a third. So just for context, we have about 120 businesses with parklets. So about a third of those have requested that these parklets be made permanent. And now there's kind of a push amongst the local restaurants to have their temporary parklets become permanent. But that would have to be a separate kind of process, just because a lot of these are built with the plastic K-rail that we eventually need to take back. They're not really meant to be out there for super long term. They were certainly quick build, but with no intention of being permanent. So in that sense, I guess this program was sort of a pilot. It kind of allowed a lot of these businesses to test out a parklet and kind of see what it would do for their business, and also kind of what it does for the character of the neighborhood. And you can kind of see some of these have been decorated. So there's the plastic K-rail are underneath all these kind of decorative elements that you might see. And these are all different ways that businesses have managed to kind of decorate and liven up their parklets. So it's not just kind of plastic K-rail sitting out all over the city. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ricardo. All right, and just a reminder, if folks do have questions, I see, people putting that into the chat. Please feel free to continue doing that, and we will address them after all the panel presentations. And so next up, I'm happy to introduce Heba El-Gwindi from the city of Culver City to share some of their perspectives. So if you'd like to share your screen, go ahead.
Thank you, Hannah. So now, Ricardo, I know who bought all the cereal, huh?
Yeah.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Heba El-Gwindi. I'm the Mobility and Traffic Engineering Manager for the city of Culver City. Our division is actually a small division that functions out of the Public Works Department. And I will have my contact for you on the last slide. And I will be sharing different applications of quick build that were initiated for different purposes. The first one is the temporary outdoor dining during the pandemic, although it's currently on hold. But the plans have been in place for several months now, and they were quite successful. The concept plan that you see on this slide is for a section on westbound Culver Boulevard in the downtown area. The concentration of our restaurants are on arterial corridors within the downtown and in the arts district. So we had to be careful with the design of the area, the types of measures, the devices that we would use to avoid liability. In these two applications, we actually closed lanes, which requires council approval. And the city also decided to fund the outdoor dining in the downtown and arts district. At the bottom there, you will see the link to the information on the city's website, culvercity.org/outdoor dining. You will find there the guidelines that we developed, as well as all of the requirements. There are no fees currently. All fees have been waived, and City Council actually funded the applications. For the downtown area, the lane closure is for a distance that exceeds a mile, with the exception of the major intersections. And because there was a desire to promote the bus service, Culver City operates its own Culver City bus service out of the transportation department. And we're about to embark in April a pilot bus bike lanes. So there was a desire to implement it in the westbound direction of Culver Boulevard and test it out. And that is what you see on the concept plan. And in those two photos on the left side of the slide. We initially, the closure was established using water-filled barricades that wouldn't restrict visibility. And we chose the colors and the reflection and so forth to enhance its visibility, especially at night. We initially thought that by installing sufficient signage and pavement marking, the road users would abide by the restriction. We even installed a gate there, but that has not been the case, and the gate was hit multiple times. So we ended up changing the pavement marking and implemented a red bus bike lane, which improved the level of compliance, but there is still some violations that take place. We haven't had collisions per se, thankfully, but we have been trying to limit the violations. The applications in the art district, which is the photo there on the right-hand side, is different and has been more successful in eliminating violations. And it still involves some closure to accommodate the outdoor dining, but we also established a bike lane that is buffered. It's not your typical buffer of 3 feet. It's only 1 foot because of the limited width. But we kept one general traffic lane and a buffered bike lane beside the outdoor dining. And in general, we've been receiving positive feedback on this application. We also realized with the level of interest in outdoor dining and in keeping it long-term, similar to Ricardo's experience, that we are going to need it long-term. So we established guidelines for parklets. And parklets are established within the parking area. It doesn't involve any lane closure. That's why it's reviewed and approved on the staff level. And I attached here a couple of, an example of the plan applications that we received from one of the parklets that we've already approved. And the guidelines are available on the city's website. There's supposed to be fees for permits, and the applicants are supposed to pay for design and construction of the parklets. And if they're eliminating any metered parking, they're also supposed to pay the city for the lost revenue. And we charge the development projects, for example, $1,000 per year per meter for 5 years. But all of the fees have been waived during the pandemic. They haven't yet been applied until beyond the COVID duration. Another application that was initiated because of the special needs during the pandemic is the Slow Streets program. We had some concerns about it because we were worried about the city's liability. However, residents in different communities have been requesting it, and we ended up a number of months ago implementing a pilot in 4 neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods. The concept that you see there is one of the corridors. Another neighborhood has multiple corridors. It depends on the layout, and these are local streets. We didn't apply them on any collectors or arterials. And the intention is to encourage social distancing, as well as encourage drivers to travel at slower speeds. We developed the signs that are shown at the bottom in-house, and we just produced them as laminated paper signs that we installed on barricades. And this sign on the right-hand side is facing the inner side of the street. So it would be facing the street users to encourage them to watch out for cars and to practice social distancing, while the other 2 is facing entering vehicular traffic to encourage them to slow down. So we installed the signs at all of the access points, as well as reminders at mid-block locations. And in a situation like this, where we have access to commercial developments, we've avoided it. And we only implemented on the residential sections of the streets. You will also find the guidelines for this program on the city's website. We also developed what you see here is the front page of a multiple page document for volunteer expectations. Culver City doesn't have many neighborhood associations or neighborhood councils, as the case in the city of LA, for example. So we're working mainly with volunteers, and we had to set the expectations. We also developed an application package and a set of guidelines. Intentionally, we thought that we would have limited involvement from staff because of our limited resources, but that hasn't been the case. And I just want to alert you on these two pictures in case you're considering implementing such application in your jurisdiction. These are two different types of barricades. This one is more sturdy, 4 feet with heavy base, and it's been successful. The residents haven't been able to move it around, but you can only really implement it on wider streets. The narrower streets, we used the 2 feet barricades, but we found them, unfortunately, on other streets that are not supposed to be slow streets. They don't have the dedication, but it has been easy for the residents to take them, move them around. And despite that we weren't planning on being that involved, we've been having to go to the 4 neighborhoods and double check the signage and replace the damaged ones or missing ones every 2 weeks. The volunteers report to us on a weekly basis, and we recently met with them because the reports weren't filled in a comprehensive manner. We receive better reports nowadays with more details to lessen our effort. And we actually have a community meeting this Thursday with the volunteers and the communities at large, because we've been receiving mixed perspective from the volunteers versus the other residents. Initially, the signage was installed in the middle of the road, but we had issues with our service trucks, and we ended up moving them to the side of the streets, although they're less visible this way, but they're not restricting access, especially for trucks. The third and last application of Quick Build, and we're receiving an ATP Quick Build grant for this, was initiated by safety concerns by the Safe Routes to School Committee. This 5-legged intersection is in close proximity to Farragut Elementary School. And the concerns raised are regarding vehicles turning at high speeds, the long distance for pedestrian crossings, and so forth. We've actually tried a few concepts. We wanted to initially to split it into 2 intersections by closing this area as well, but the residents didn't want us to impact parking. And this intersection meets some of the warrants for signalization, but again, this is not something that the community wants. not to encourage vehicular traffic on overland. So we ended up with this concept shown here. And the quick build is not going to construct a landscaped or hardscaped island. This is just for presentation purposes. The measures that we will be using are planters and delineators. As well as we will enhance the pavement marking, we will push the location of the stop signs, and we are splitting the intersection into two, basically, but still having the right turn movement here open, which is one of the items that we will be addressing in another community meeting with the neighborhood. The challenges and that we've been facing and the next steps, these are all new programs that we did not have in the past, especially the outdoor dining and the slow streets. They were initiated during the pandemic, and our division and public works department had to get together quickly, develop the guidelines, and we've been updating the guidelines where we did a few updates based on the experience that we've been having with this new program. So that added to our demands, and we have limited staffing and limited funds. Thankfully, we were able to use the statewide and in the outdoor dining that was cheaper than what we expected. So the funds that council approved for the outdoor dining, we've been using for the slow streets as well, and for some of the cost of the parklets. It added to the demands for outreach and community consensus building. The Culver City community is very involved. It's a relatively small city, and we would like always to have the community on board with the different initiatives. In this case, especially with the Slow Streets program, we also needed to work on recruiting volunteers and having them on board long term, because it has been several months already, and some of the volunteers decided that they don't have the time and the commitments needed. So it's an ongoing process of recruitments and regular communications. There was impacts on our service trucks that was raised by the different divisions within Public Works, and we were able to address that. We've been faced with the unsafe behaviors of the road users and the violations of the restrictions, and we've had to make adjustments to our plans to address the concerns and avoid collisions from happening. And we also realized that there is long-term need. Even with the slow streets, the community now is using it as a traffic calming program, which is not the intention. And we're not planning to keep these barricades long-term. That's why it initiated the need for updating our traffic calming program guidelines, because as it is now, it takes a long time to plan, design, construct. So we're trying to make it more effective in terms of time and funding and resources in general, so that we can meet the community's needs in a more timely fashion, and we wouldn't need the slow streets beyond the pandemic duration. The permanent Parklet program is here to stay, but this is going to continue to be only within the parking zones, the curbside parking areas, and we will initiate the fees when feasible. But the Parklet program does not involve lane closure. With that, I believe that the Q&A will be at the end of all presentations. Here is my contact information. Please feel free to contact me in the future if you have questions or need any of our guidelines, if you have difficulties in accessing them on the website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heba. And just a quick reminder, we'll be posting, the presentations from today on Skag's website. So they'll all be accessible for folks joining today and folks who weren't able to join today as well. And so next up, we have Stephen Mateer joining us from the city of Glendora to share what they have been doing for quick build projects and around the pandemic as well. So go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Hannah. My name is Stephen Mateer. I'm the transportation manager for the city of Glendora. I want to talk to you today about two of our first last mile demonstration and quick build projects. So as a background, some of you may know, Glendora is getting ready for the Gold Line. The new Gold Line extension will be opening up in about 4 years. And so as part of that, we've been engaged in planning and outreach to build consensus and community support around access improvements. There are two projects. We had one was a one-day demo and then a longer quick build project. The goals that we've had for this, our outreach is to reach people that we don't traditionally get in touch with through social media or regular outreach, as well as troubleshooting. We want to understand what are going to be the real issues in real time after implementation. Lastly, it was to help continue dialogue. As I mentioned, there's about a 4 to 5 year window of construction for the Gold Line. So this was a way to sustain community involvement and outreach over that time. So we had two projects. One is what we called Roll to the Stroll. It tied into our annual holiday stroll, which is one of the largest community events we have in Glendora. And what this did is it tested out a protected bike lane, curb extension, signage and wayfinding, and a parklet. This was a partnership with Skag and Active SGV, and in kind of a funny quirk, we actually stumbled into this opportunity as another city wasn't able to deliver their demo, so we were able to take advantage of that. A lot of this was focused on outreach and building support around first last mile. This is really the first time any type of infrastructure around bike and pedestrian were installed in Glendora, and so a lot of it was just talking to residents about what these things are. And that's still something we're dealing with. A lot of residents don't really know what is a bike lane, what is a curb extension, what are these funny things on my road is kind of a common comment we've heard. Currently, we have a quick build project on Glendora Avenue, which you see here in this picture. And this is a 4, maybe 5 month project. And I put maybe 5 because the Gold Line closed Glendora Avenue's the construction. We were hoping they would open up at the end of January. That's now been pushed back to February, which means we haven't been able to collect the traffic counts that we wanted to. So we may actually extend this a month. Because I mentioned this was to test first last mile projects. So this was a protected bike lane, a number of curb extensions, more permanent barriers, as well as continental crosswalks. Similar to the Roll to the Stroll, this was a partnership across multiple agencies and partners. One was the SGV Council of Governments, which gave us repurposed open streets money. Active SGV, which was their contractor, which helped us with installation. And Glendora Gardens, which is a local nursery, loaned us the plants that you see here in the picture. So in terms of details about this, the funding I think is really important for these projects. First, the demo project really was funded entirely out of an existing planning study that was conducted by the cities along Arrow Highway out in this area. So the city we didn't put any money into that. However, for the quick build project, we used Transportation Development Act 3 funds, which are reserved for bike and pedestrian projects for design and material purchases, And we also use, I mentioned, the repurposed Open Streets Fund, which was a grant under the SGV Council of Governments. In terms of the materials, for the demo, we use the Skag kit of parts, which are great because they're very easy to install, and Hannah was a great partner with us on that. And they're fun, vibrant colors, and I think that was a very good introduction for Glendora on what these improvements look like. For the quick build project, we brought a variety of materials. One was high visibility tape. We purchased the planters that you saw, so we have 2x2, and then those longer, I think they're about 3x6 or 3x5 planters. Bought the delineator posts, as well as the plants were loaned to us by Garden. So this kind of gets into, you know, working with local businesses to see if there's ways they can support your project. Now, challenges and lessons learned. This has been something that's been really interesting for us. One is outreach. I would say the biggest pushback we got with the quick build project were just people who didn't know what we were doing and didn't know what this project was. You know, we had gone door to door to about 200 residents and businesses handing out flyers, and still some of them said they never got the flyer. So, you know, you'll never do enough outreach. However, that's something that was definitely a stumbling block for us. Also, too, was a varying quality of materials. As you see here in this picture, this tape that we're laying down, this was stuff that was advertised as being, you know, all weather, will last, you know, snow, rain. This is the stuff that came up the fastest when we had that rain a couple weeks ago, whereas the tape we used for the bike lane, which is not as advertised as high quality, was fine. And so that's something to be mindful of, is materials you use and the costs that you put into these projects, especially if they're, you know, open for a week, couple months, is not sinking too much money into this project. They're ultimately going to be, you know, removing or changing. Last challenge, I think, you know, Heba touched on this, is staffing and resources for maintenance. You know, we're a very small city as well, and my colleague and I, we go out about once a week to patch up the bike lane, fix certain areas that are falling apart, or, you know, the maintenance. We have a lot of those gumdrop trees which drop leaves, and so we're out there, I said, once a week cleaning it ourselves. Also, installation was a challenge. You know, we've had a lot of workers unfortunately be out due to COVID, so that's presented issues with having you know, staffing resources for installation and maintenance. Lastly, as I mentioned, you know, is to start the outreach early, outreach often, and continue it through the project. Field realities versus the plans. You know, one of the things that we noticed is that some of the turn radiuses that we designed are too tight and don't allow a lot of vehicles to pass through. So we've had to adjust that and also set limit lines back further, for example. You know, work as much as you can to ensure proper staffing and resources, and take risks. I mean, a lot of the reason why we were able to do the two projects we had is that we took the leap and, you know, committed the resources and worked quickly to take advantage of those opportunities that came up. So with that, I'll keep it quick because I know we want to get to the Q&A. So thank you very much, and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. All right, and our last presentation, happy to introduce Ata Khan from the city of Pomona.
Hi, everybody. How you doing? Are you able to see my slides here?
Yep, I can see them.
Okay, great.
Oh, if you want to put them into presentation mode, we're seeing presenter mode.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks to Skag for organizing this Toolbox Tuesday. We're very honored to be able to participate on behalf of the city of Pomona. My name is Ata Khan. I'm a supervising planner with the City of Pomona Planning Division. And we also have here with us Anita Gutierrez, our Director of Development Services, Renee Guerrero, our Director of Public Works, and Alex Jimenez, our Assistant Planner. One of the things that I definitely sympathize with what was just said by Stephen over in Glendora when he's talking about going out once a week to look at things, is we definitely are a nimble staff over here in Pomona as well. We can certainly appreciate having to kind of always work on a quick build philosophy when it comes to having a lot of competing projects going on. But what I want to spend 10 minutes going over is how Pomona is embracing a quick build approach, and a little bit about our Activate Pomona program. So real quick, why quick build? And, from a policy perspective, why is it important? So it's important to kind of see where Pomona fits in the greater Skag region. We're 23 square miles, 150,000 people, about 6,000 per square mile, pretty much the equivalent of Pasadena. You look at neighboring cities such as Santa Ana, Culver City, Long Beach, LA, they have varying densities. And going all the way to LA, looking at even within Los Angeles, you have a place like Koreatown, which is the densest place in the United States at 46,000 people per square mile. And then Woodland Hills at about 4,500 per square mile. Pomona is about 6,000. But there's a few things that are happening in the city that we are paying attention to. The first is our general plan, where we're anticipating up to 100 units an acre on a lot of our properties. The second is we're gearing up for our 6th cycle housing element, and our arena goals put us at about approximately 40,000 residents to accommodate. We currently load about 3.7 per household and about 10,000 plus units that we would need to accommodate. And then lastly, as Stephen mentioned, as our neighbor over in Glendora, the L line or gold line would be coming in the next 4 or 5 years. So what that creates is a situation where Pomona is close to headed to where Long Beach is now in terms of density. And it's certainly going to become one of the more denser areas in the community, the greater Skag community. So a quick build approach is really important to allow Pomona to grow responsibly, but do it in a way that's as close to real time as possible with the community in tow, so that we can start testing out ideas, just like Glendora's testing out bike lanes with the first mile, last mile. We need to be able to test out these ideas so it's not a surprise when the growth inevitably happens. Now, here's Pomona, 23 square miles. And I wanted to explain really the existing regulations when it comes to activating space and doing quick builds. And so if we kind of conceptualize this into 5% grids here, how is our land used in Pomona? So 35% of our space right now is residential, and that's regulated in order to activate right now from a business standpoint. We do have a home occupation permit, a home-based business permit. 25% or 1 out of every 4 parcels in our city.
Sorry, the slides are hard to see. Maybe you want to restart it. For some reason, it's bigger than what we're seeing on the screen. So we're not seeing the full slide.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me...
Yeah, Jennifer, if you're on, I'm not sure if there's any advice that we can give, but yeah, it's a little bit bigger than what the audience can actually see on the screen.
Yeah, it might be, is the file downloaded locally? It may be if you're sharing it. And also as a backup, I have a copy, so oh, there you go. Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and try it again here real quick. Sorry about that.
It's just like the edges of the.
Yeah, it's just like the things on the edge of the presentation.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah, it's still a little bit. Is it like more than 100%? Are you able to see or
click that little ellipses, Atad, on the bottom there to the left.
I don't see an ellipses here. Sorry.
The little circle with the little ellipses in it, right below your screen. Oh, you don't see that?
No. Yeah, I have it here. And then let's see. That's weird. It's never happened to me before.
We can try to bring it up on our end if that would be easier.
Yeah. Actually, let me see here.
Oh, there we go.
Oh yeah, that looks like it's working.
Is that fine?
Do you see that little circle with the 3 dots in it on your screen, Atad?
I don't know.
The only thing is now we're seeing presenter mode, so we see like the slide ahead as well.
Okay.
How about F5?
That.
That might be able to pull you into full screen mode. The F5 key.
Okay, let me try this one more time. Oh, you know what I have here is okay, let me try this again. Is that showing anything?
See the presentation, just not the presenter mode, but that might be better than what we were seeing. So
Yes.
No, this is still the same issue.
Okay, I'm
Yeah, we might.
I'm gonna go here
Yeah.
in this mode then. Is that better, Anita?
Yeah, we can at least see the full screen, so
Okay, great.
I would just do that.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So
I
yeah,
could also
so,
share if you, that could be like our last option if you want me to.
So we have in our city of Pomona, we have 35% of our parcels are residential, and so they're regulated by a home occupation permit for home-based businesses, and we're seeing an increased interest in wanting to activate actual homes to do business-related restaurants and home enterprise kitchens. We also have 1 out of 4 parcels, essentially, or 25% of the city is our public right-of-way, and that's regulated by our outdoor dining permit and our encroachment permit. 15% of our city is private commercial and industrial, and then a quarter of our city is public parks, plazas, and open space. So quickly, we got a sense that we have 4 or 5 different permit pathways to do different kinds of activations citywide, and they all have different insurance requirements and things of that nature. So due to COVID, which really accelerated the interest in wanting to streamline all of this, we launched a pilot program in July of 2020 called Activate Pomona. And it was really guided by 4 key questions. The first is equity. Do the regulations benefit all residents and business owners citywide, or only a specific few? Liability, are we satisfactorily addressing a question that concern that came up a lot in previous presentations, which was insurance requirements and city risk, essentially, when it comes to the public right-of-way. Safety is also important from the standpoint of really, and you're seeing this play out daily in the news and daily just with every jurisdiction. How do you balance the need to be flexible as a city with businesses against the need for public safety? In this case, for the last 10 months, public health due to COVID-19. And then lastly, practicality. Do these regulations provide a clear, quick, low-cost path to activate space, which I think really gets at the heart of the quick build philosophy. So I wanted to speak briefly about one aspect of that program, which is our parklets and street closures and what we've been trying to do there. So a few things had to go into the works from a resolution kind of legislative standpoint to get this going. The Public Works Department under Renee has very quickly turned around Public Works Parklet guidelines. For the first time, we have official guidelines to really regulate how parklets can get established in the city. These aren't quite that dissimilar from what you might be seeing in Long Beach and Culver City, as you've seen already. We adopted a resolution at the city council level approving the Activate Pomona program. We intentionally established it to be a pretty broad-based business recovery and gave a lot of latitude to the department council. And we also approved a Cultural Arts Commission resolution establishing for the first time a public temporary art pilot program. And this was coinciding with Activate Pomona. You could see there the number is 49,999.99. Anybody who's worked in the city has known that that's intentional, because if you exceed 50,000, we were going to have to go to city council. So things like that saved us, 4 to 6 weeks as we were trying to do a quick build here. We also generated an Activate Pomona permit. This was issued, this is a sample permit for one of the downtown businesses. We've had about 181 applications to date, and those are citywide, and those do include parklets. So once we got to that point, we needed to do some conceptual mapping on the staff level. So Public Works, Anita's shop and Renee's shop got together to really, in this case, look at downtown and see where could we possibly establish some K-rails to really put some street closures in play, and starting to work with those businesses. We work with the Downtown Pomona Owners Association, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and other stakeholders, Fox Theater, O'Donovan's, and the local businesses to figure out where they wanted to activate. And this was kind of in parallel with the ever-changing health guidelines. So as we know now, outdoor dining is not permitted, but even a few months ago, it was definitely at the forefront of the requests. We also did a few partnerships which really were critical in increasing our capacity to deliver. So from an arts standpoint, we partnered with the Daw Center for the Arts located in downtown Pomona. They have spearheaded the implementation of the K-Rail Artist Program, which I'm going to explain in a moment. And they also were able to cover liability insurance for all of the 35 plus artists that we funded, which quite literally saved the amount of time to issue checks to artists from 3 months to maybe 3 weeks. So that was really important to streamline liability. And then Active San Gabriel Valley, in association with the San Gabriel Valley COG, had some grants for some cycling events and public events that we're no longer able to use. And we partnered with them to purchase the concrete K-rails. I think we may have used a different vendor than Long Beach, so we were able to get some of those ones that I know Ricardo had mentioned that they grabbed. But we did get concrete K-rails and plastic water-filled K-rails. That was a non-negotiable standard to make sure that we had at least sufficient coverage on less than 25-mile-per-hour streets so that we could avoid accidents. So here are some shots of the Public Works crew putting a K-rail down to facilitate the Thomas Street closure. Closer shots here, you can see that Thomas Street essentially dead ends at 2nd Street. We have a couple of businesses there. This is Homage Brewing, and they were able to take advantage, at least this was taken before the dining closure, to take advantage of essentially on-street parking spaces and retooling those to be for the business. And we've also facilitated other pop-ups to go in that area as well. So it's a lot of space. It's quite amazing what happens when you remove cars from a street and you realize how gigantic that right-of-way really is. We also then were able to facilitate here in O'Donovan's a Parklet. You could see local artists Kennedy Irene and Sam from the School of Arts and Enterprises, high school artists, were able to do these K-rail pieces, which served the double purpose of also being a safety barrier. And as you look closely, O'Donovan's was able to kind of fill in the gaps every 8 feet to put in their own wooden fencing. And right now, this shot taken, it's empty now, but they're going to be, hopefully, if the regulations permit and things look better, they can use that space to actually facilitate their dining again. And this is a graphic that I wanted to share and give credit to Alex Jimenez, our assistant planner, who's really been instrumental in implementing this program. A sense of kind of the nimbleness that we need. This was just schematics she drew up on Photoshop to guide applicants on what they could possibly do with their parklets. I think we just heard from Culver City on that as well. And I think those guidelines become really helpful to know, here's how drainage would work, here's how high you can have a canopy, here's how many seats you can do. And so they could really get a sense of what's possible in the parklet space and really reimagine the right-of-way as being on-street parking to something else. Other shots here of the K-rails, you can see the artists working. Before I kick it off to Anita and Renee to share their thoughts from a director's perspective on how this program is going, these were like kind of two of my favorite photos that really kind of summarize what's going on here. And so like if you really break this photo down, you have grant-funded barriers creating a parklet. You have the property owners buying in. You have the staff being ready. You know, in this case, our incredible public works crew was available at 7 a.m. to deploy K-rails. We have public art that can now be essentially a roving gallery that can be established anywhere citywide. We're addressing insurance and liability and safety precautions. We have funded artists. And the leather jacket from Eduardo as well on display. So you have a full kind of range of what's going on with our kind of Activate Pomona temporary art program right now. Here's another shot. This is Shane, local artist, doing some really incredible work. And you can start to see how Quick Build can take a life of its own. This is social media postings where the artists are now being showcased online. Folks are now coming to downtown even during COVID just to bring their families to see the art. So it's not just serving the businesses for outdoor dining, but there's a renewed interest in just kind of going downtown to see what's going on there. Here's a shot of 2nd Street. You know, again, very unique uses that we've permitted. This is aerial acrobatics that was going on a couple months ago. This is normally frequented 2 ways by cars, and we were able to do something there. And so I wanted to, before I get into the final takeaways, Anita, if you wanted to just give a perspective on, I guess, challenges and opportunities that came out of this.
Yeah, thanks, Ata. And I think just want to touch on 2 quick things. One was collaboration, and the other is flexibility. So I think key to this success of this program was collaboration amongst not only with the business community and our members of the public, but also within City Hall itself. So collaborating with Public Works, Building and Safety, planning, fire department, to make sure that everything that we were doing was, of course, safe, had accessible to emergency responsiveness. We even checked in with PD, and then working with Public Works to make sure that traffic issues were addressed and not creating new ones. And then I think secondly, flexibility. I think in doing some of the street closures, for instance, we had originally closed off 2nd Street. We heard later through the program that some businesses, at least on the west side, it wasn't working. So we changed it. We moved the barriers, moved the closure to Thomas Street. The 2nd Street closure on the east side of Gary stayed on for several more weeks. Later on, after the change in public health orders, no longer allowed outdoor dining, that street closure didn't make sense. So we took that down, spread out the barriers. So it was just really being flexible and adapting to what the business needed, what worked for this current situation, what worked for the community, and being able to respond. And then also, in terms of some of those businesses had quite a variety of ideas on how they wanted to use parklets and street closures, and we really explored all of them with legitimacy. Some of them couldn't, and I think that gets into what Renee is going to touch on and how we created the standards for what we ultimately approved and what we didn't, but just having an open mind to create it. So I think the importance of having that quick build and the benefits of it is it really allows you the opportunity to see what works and what doesn't, and to do it quickly. So with that, I'll let Renee say a few words.
Thanks, Nita, and thanks, Atah. Yeah, just real quick, just I know being mindful of time, I need to touch on one of the things I was going to say, which was about teamwork. You know, despite the common statement that I've heard throughout my career that engineers and planners don't get along, we're like oil and water. We actually do get along quite well, and our relationship and the cohesion that we have, you know, really showed and displayed in this project. It was a team effort, and I'll even go as far as saying, you know, the Water Resources Department here in the city, which is separate from the Public Works Department. Us in the Public Works Department, we didn't have a lot of the equipment like that forklift that you may have seen earlier. That's not a Public Works piece of equipment. That's a Water Resources Department piece of equipment. So I had to call on my colleague, the Water Resources Department director, to ask for his assistance and get his staff over to help us either, you know, relocate these very large and very heavy concrete, you know, 20-foot long concrete K-rails. And it was seamless. And I think not only did, obviously I appreciate that, and our city manager and our council, but ultimately the businesses who are seeing the rewards, or who were seeing the rewards of this, I think they ultimately were those that really appreciated this. You know, on the more technical side of things, you know, when we talk about the design standard that we created for the placement of both concrete and water-filled K-rails, you know, we really look out for the safety of the patrons and safety of motorists, those drivers that are out there. So, you know, we were looking at streets that are 25 miles per hour or less. You know, I specifically I wanted to be sure that that first piece of K-rail in the direction of traffic was a concrete K-rail. We could put a water-filled K-rail there, but I wanted to be sure that was a concrete K-rail, just for my own peace of mind, really. But again, ultimately, this was a great lesson in teamwork, and the rewards, you know, went beyond what I expected. I'm an engineer at heart, and so when I see, you know, I don't think about art like this. I just think about concrete and pavement and streetlights and concrete sidewalks. But ultimately, to see kind of how this blossomed into this artwork, and it gave just many different facets of our community, the artists and the patrons and our business owners. It really kind of helped in many ways. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity, and you know, hope that, well, on one hand, I hope we don't have to do this again, but you know, considering our times, you know, this is hopefully we can continue to use these things, and these projects will be utilized so that our businesses can thrive. And that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee. Thanks, Anita. Yeah, and just to finish, you know, what's our data to show if it's working or not? All we have right now is qualitative data. My 6-year-old liked this art here downtown on Thomas Street. The local artists like it. We're going to collect more information and more quantitative data to see how much pedestrian traffic we get. But with that, that's happy to answer questions, and we have the whole staff available when we get to Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ata. That was great. And so, I wanted to dive into Q&A. And before we get to, some questions from our participants, wanted to pose a couple of questions to our panelists just to get us thinking and also maybe answer some of the questions that folks have. And particularly, from the city of Pomona, I was really inspired by your presentation and especially, the note about engineers and planners working together. I think that was kind of a common theme across all of these presentations. And I'm curious, what are some of maybe the major kind of key takeaways and sort of lessons learned from this experience that you can share with, the other cities that are on the line? And then, from our other panelists, what are your perspectives on this? And sort of, has this kind of inspired, processes, across your either planning division, the city, other projects that the city has going on? Curious to hear, some lessons learned for others to take away.
Yeah, I think one thing, and Renee, feel free to jump in on that, but I think as a planner and being generally a more ivory tower and pie in the sky with our ideas and long range, one thing I learned immediately from this was you kind of have to get to the point of the bare minimum legal and kind of liability requirements and then work from there. I think, and that's a lesson I've learned from Anita and Renee and working with Chris in risk management, is that, there's no way you can have barriers that are not going to withstand vehicular accidents. And nobody wants that in the moment. We had one, if we had one accident and that happened, the whole program's done, the art program's done. So we had to work backwards from that. And I think that was the genesis of seeing other cities too, like Santa Monica and even in the East Coast, doing beautification barriers. Saying, okay, what's the rate limiting step, and work backwards. And so I think that's been helpful. Same with building and safety and fire. If Captain Annalyn is telling us you have to do this from a fire perspective, how do we get creative to at least meet that mark and then still be flexible? So.
And I think just also being hands-on, like we did a field trip out there. It was Renee, Arnold, our city engineer, Ata, myself, Alex, and physically walked those initial spaces to determine, is this going to work? From an engineer's perspective, I think that Renee and Arnold were, what are you guys talking about? How's this going to work? And so we went out there, all looked at it together. Okay, here's what we're talking about. Here's the parameters. It's 8 feet from the curb. Arnold had his yardstick, or Ron had his yardstick with him, his 6-foot ADA access yardstick, and really talked about it in a realistic environment. This is what we're talking about. It's this space. And then we just naturally started getting into specifics. Okay, if you're going to do it, I think it should be this far from the curb, start at this many feet back from the corner. And then, by the end of that short visit, we ended up talking, okay, and this spot is interested in doing one too. What do you think about this spot? Do you see any issues with using it in front of this barbershop? So we hit a couple spots along the way, and by the end of that short 1 hour site visit, we had gotten real concrete specifics on what concerns we really had on specific parklets, which then led to actual implementation.
And at the end of the day, it's really a balance. I function out of public works, so we're a bunch of engineers, and we worked with the transportation department that operates Culver City bus planners. So we look at things from different perspectives, and there needs to be flexibility and the desire to hear one another and achieve a plan that meets everyone's goals. And it's just not just for internal coordination, it's with the community as well. And being flexible to go back and make adjustments to the plans. For example, one of the things that we did for the outdoor dining to allow for ADA accessibility, we've allowed openings that at least 4 feet where the curb ramps are that leads into the dining area. But cyclists misunderstood it, and they ended up using it, and they ended up landing inside the dining area rather than using their own space. So being observant, being flexible to go back and make adjustments, but because this is new to us and we're learning as we go.
And I'll add to just don't pass up any opportunity to do outreach, both internally and externally. You know, when I got here, you know, I went right up to Public Works Director in our street maintenance division and said, let me talk about first last mile. Let me explain to you why we're doing this, what we're thinking. You know, we have monthly safety meetings. I did a presentation on our planning, you know, so really getting buy-in from top to bottom. I thought it was great that we had our street crews out there doing the install of the bike lane with us, because then they got to see why we're doing this and how this works. And so that's one of the benefits too, is that everything can be outreach if you make it. So, you know, don't be shy, you know, just really kind of preach this in a way.
Great. And also, Ricardo, do you have any thoughts you want to share?
Nothing too much. You guys are pretty thorough. But yeah, it was a big learning process. We definitely had our share of adjustments and learning lessons as well. I think for me, the biggest joy I got out of this, and I mean, you know, despite the pandemic, was I think that a lot of the community really got to see the benefits of sort of these kind of complete streets type designs like parklets, and I don't think that level of piloting of the parklets would have happened without the pandemic. So for me, that was sort of a silver lining. It's kind of weird to say that, but it is nice to see the level of interest in keeping these sorts of spaces going, even once the pandemic is behind us. So, you know, the fact that we did have so many businesses want to continue having a parklet was inspiring. So I hope that kind of feeds into other things like active transportation type infrastructure, you know, more than just kind of those parklet spaces. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. And I guess to piggyback off of that question, and I know, you know, folks touched on, you know, public outreach and engagement. I'm curious if there were any type of, you know, I know, Atal, you mentioned the partnership with the DA Arts and really, you know, the local artists. I'm curious if there were any sorts of kind of key partnerships or stakeholders, you know, while you were doing outreach and engagement, if you can kind of touch on that a little bit, and kind of how that, you know, helped, you know, gain buy-in and, you know, kind of make the projects and programs more successful.
I could speak to that briefly, and then actually hand it off to maybe Alex, because we were just speaking about this yesterday. And one of the things that she mentioned that I thought was quite insightful was just, again, knowing our limitation is that we have a small staff. It does at least let us be a little bit more customizable, or as Anita said, we could go out to the business and talk to them. And I think a lot of the stakeholder development, we didn't have the time to do it more intentionally and kind of have an outreach plan. And so it really just was requiring a kind of day-to-day Alex meeting with the business owner, Anita working with the Downtown Pomona Owners Association, Alex and Anita giving a presentation at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and just really day by day being ready to kind of adapt. And then sometimes business owners would come in and say, we really just don't like what you're doing, you know, and we want to change it. And others would say, oh, I kind of want to do the same thing. But Alex, did you have thoughts on that?
No, I think you summarized it pretty well. I think the stakeholders that we ended up with, it was something that we built along the way. and really unexpected stakeholders, because we had so many people come in and established all these networks after, from people that we otherwise would have never met, especially a lot of our downtown owners that we never had the ability to talk to. And meeting their needs during this pandemic was something that I think we were all able to just go out and actually facilitate on site, which was really nice. And it's not, I think for all planners, we don't have the opportunity to always do that. So this pilot program allowed us to establish those connections.
If I can add to that, again, Culver City is a small city, but was big problems, being located adjacent to Los Angeles and the airport and so forth. I think it's important to also identify the facilitator. For example, we worked heavily with the Downtown Business Association, and they coordinated with the different businesses, because we don't have the resources to go out there and reach out to all the businesses. The community associations, even key volunteers that can assist us in communicating with the rest of the volunteers for the slow streets, for example. Try to find ways to make it as effective and efficient as possible.
And, in Glendora, we're almost the opposite problem. We have no capacity. We have no real vocal public support for what we're doing. A lot of this is at this point staff driven. But I will say, and I'll give a shout out to Sam's team at Ulta. The work they've done for us in producing renderings has gone a long way in communicating and changing attitudes about what Glendora can be. So if you're like us and don't have a lot of support and more immediate support, having a good consultant team or good designers helps a lot to ease some of those concerns and helps build, I think, support for these projects.
Thanks, Steve. One thing I would just mention that we found in our research too for the quick build guide is that actually having a deadline and of course the pandemic has provided the ultimate deadline to all of us, and just the appetite for improvements, for greater facilities, for more space to recreate or dine or whatever the case may be, can be really effective at sort of forcing action and improve and getting different jurisdictions to provide facility improvements. One of the examples we highlighted in the guide is Austin, Texas. And in Austin, they received, I think it was $137 million of grant funding for implementation of their bikeway network. But it all had a sunset date. I can't remember the exact details, but it was like within the next 2 years. And so it really forced the city to sort of assess their resources, both from a staffing perspective as well as materials. They streamlined the whole implementation process, and they were able to deliver a remarkable number of overall mileage of their bikeway network. And I think that's what we're seeing during the pandemic too. It's just a lot of, it's been so inspiring. I was listening to sort of all the panelists talk about the amount of coordination, collaboration, sort of breaking down of silos and having all the different divisions and groups within the city working together and coordinating for what I think is really sort of fantastic results, and something that ultimately the community ends up benefiting from having these sort of greater spaces and facilities for walking, biking, just enjoying the civic spaces that are being provided. So yeah, great job, everyone.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, it is really inspiring to see, all the different folks working together. Definitely agree on that point. So I wanted to take a moment, and I know we had a few questions in the chat come up, and I saw, some of our panelists were responding directly. I think we had one question from Elise. If you're still on with us, I knew you had a specific question about concerns over the parklets blocking retail store window visibility. I'm curious if there were any guidelines on how to avoid that. Maybe Sam, I would pass that question to you if, in your research you found anything, or if there's anything in practice that the cities were doing for that.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a specific answer. I guess the overarching thing I would say is just make sure that you're engaging with those key stakeholders. We've definitely found that the communication is critical. So maybe understanding, it sounds like that would be something that would come out of that dialogue, and understanding if there are line of sight issues, or I imagine this is maybe the concern from the retailer would be that they're concerned about losing business, right? I mean, that's usually the bottom line. And so making sure that the project isn't perceived as adversely impacting their bottom line. So whether that's a parking issue, a visibility issue, really just having that discourse and discussion. And I think that goes such a long way to getting community and business support for the project.
If I can add to that, despite that it hasn't necessarily been an issue, there are ways of going around that. Actually, the visibility has been an issue from a traffic perspective. When you barricade areas close to intersections and maintaining the line of sight. So staff, we have been trying to be careful with that to avoid collisions. But in terms of visibility of the different restaurants and businesses, you can always customize the shelter. In addition to the outdoor dining design that the city implemented, because of the rainy season, the restaurants came out and installed tents and other coverage. But they also customized it, and they added their logo, and they added some signage. So there are ways of going about it that wouldn't impact the businesses per se.
Yeah, in Glendora, we had a very similar issue. And I think Eric from Manhattan Beach noted in the chat that they got written approval from the neighboring business. And that's something we required too, that if we're putting a parklet down and it is taking a parking spot, say in front of a retail store or another business, they have to get written approval that it's okay to take that parking spot. So that's how we've navigated those access issues or line of sight issues.
And then for the city of Pomona, the way that we framed that was really around our artwork. So for those barriers of beauty, we asked all of our participants who wanted to do a parklet to not block any of that art. So it was a way of us controlling a little bit of the shell that would go around any of these parklets. And then anything that they would want to build as a canopy or coverage would need to remain open on a minimum of 3 sides for anything that would be around those parklets.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. And Ricardo, feel free to jump in if you have anything to mention as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the only real thing that Long Beach did was, we asked neighboring businesses to provide consent for the parklets as well, if a parklet kind of extended beyond any one storefront. But that was about it. I kind of mentioned in the chat that we had pulled a lot of these kind of guidelines and requirements from the permanent parklet program that we already had in place prior to COVID. So we used some of those guidelines for the design of the temporary parklets as well, to the extent that we could. But aside from that, yeah, we haven't had any real issues with sight line blockages for like retail or anything like that. I mean, well, we had one at the very beginning where we had to remind a business of the guidelines, and they did have this huge kind of shade that was blocking their neighbors, but it was actually not ADA compliant. So that was kind of an easy fix. So, I mean, yeah, it's kind of seeing what resources you have at your disposition. ADA is one thing that we've had to use often to make sure that sidewalks are clear and there's nothing hanging overhead, the sidewalk and that kind of stuff. So that was a good tool for us as well.
Yeah, that's great. All right, and let's see. And just a reminder, if folks do have questions, feel free to raise your hand. I can call on you. You can unmute yourself and, ask your question. And I see Eric from the City of Manhattan Beach. I know you had a couple of questions in the chat, so just want to make sure, those questions were addressed, or if you wanted to add anything.
Oh, well, thank you for offering. Yeah, there's a lot of great information. I did get my questions answered. We took a little bit of different approach to our outdoor dining program. We have 27 outdoor dining areas now in the city and 24 sidewalk dining areas. We did require the applicants to pay for their permits, but the city paid for any meter charges and any extenuating inspections or anything like that. We're looking now at the questions of putting canopies or tarps over the tops of these dining areas and putting electrical in them for evening dining once and if that gets restored. We did convert all of our public parklets to our dining areas into public parklets for the time period when the county was saying no outdoor dining. We're trying to skirt around that a little bit and still allow for takeout food and for people to use the parklets as a public space. It kind of answers the question that somebody had about, can the public still use these spaces? We have encroachment permits for all of these outdoor dining areas, and so there was a private encroachment on public property. But then all the restaurants basically released their encroachments for the time period that everyone can use the dining areas as public parklets. But since then, we've now closed everything down because of the increase in infections. So we'll see what happens.
Eric, this is a towel over the Pomona. If I may, because Alex and I were closely monitoring from afar what Manhattan Beach was doing, as I'm sure everybody's looking at what everybody else is doing. But that public parklet concept, we think that's kind of fascinating because I think long term, so much of it is like, hey, take out to go food, but you just kind of want to have some passive seating. Do you see that working long term in Manhattan Beach?
Yeah, definitely. We have a long-term outdoor dining task force with 2 council members on it. And we're looking at permanently creating public parklets, either by for particular restaurants or just in general for people to use for dining areas. We are struggling to get past, some of the logistics, because if it's a public area, it has to be publicly maintained, or maintenance and trash and all the rest of that. For the private restaurants, they are responsible for it, and they have to maintain it, and they have to take care of the trash and all the rest. So it may be a dual partnership. It might be, a public-private type of thing. But there's a lot of interest in the city to do it on a permanent basis.
Great.
Hi, Eric. I actually have a question for you. Did you say, okay, you had converted those dining spaces intended for restaurants into public spaces for a while, but now everything is shut down?
Correct. Yeah. We did another public health order that says that all public seating in our city is closed.
Okay.
Actually, I would like to touch on something that Eric referred to. I didn't include it in the presentation. As Hannah would know, I just finished the presentation just before the meeting. but be prepared to establish areas for loading zones because the outdoor dining eliminates quite a bit of parking, and you need to have accommodations for deliveries to the different restaurants and businesses, as well as for customers coming to pick up food and such. So keep in mind selecting the locations, the dimensions of these locations to serve which businesses while you're planning the outdoor dining spaces.
I definitely agree on that. We have created a dozen what we call flex spaces, where it's either Uber and Lyft or takeout, pickup and for your products on a short-term basis, and then at other times of the day it's regular parking.
Great. Alrighty. Looks like we have one more question in the chat from Elise. Elise, I'm happy to read it out to the group, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Thanks. I was wondering if we have our downtown area with our parklets that's in a special flood hazard area, and also it's actually the regulated floodway. So we've installed, or some businesses have installed, temporary parklets, and we're really interested in making them permanent in the long term. But I'm just wondering if anyone else has them in flood zones, and if so, what are they doing like during the winter rainy season?
Yeah, in Glendora, I mean, I don't think we're in a flood zone, but our downtown does get flooded when it rains quite a bit. And so that's the move for us to go to a permanent arrangement. So when we designed them, or we're in the process of designing them right now, we made sure they're raised up sufficiently so that water can travel underneath, and that the first leg that they stand on, it's these adjustable little pegs that you put in the ground, that it's just outside the curb or the gutter area, so that way water can go through. Because yeah, our village drainage, unfortunately, is very poor. It's from, you know, the 1800s or early 1900s, so it hasn't really kept pace with that. And so yeah, we're dealing with that too as we design that. But I think having them raised up higher, certainly off the street, and then also having the clearance underneath them for debris to move through helps with that.
And that's a good idea regardless. We're taking the same approach despite that it's not in flood zones in our case, but for drainage purposes in general, the parklets need to be at a higher elevation than the pavement level.
Yeah, you definitely need some sort of gutter channel. I think one detail would be to maybe have some sort of mesh screen in front of the, wherever the water is going to go, so you don't get debris or trash under the parklet, because that's going to be really difficult to clean out, especially if it's something that's going to stink after a while. So the mesh just kind of keeps stuff from getting under there and makes it a lot easier for folks to clean any trash.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that question, Elise. Any other insights or recommendations for that from folks? I know we have about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to start trying to wrap some things up, but definitely wanted to give, our panelists, a chance to, make any last minute kind of takeaways or insights, or any kind of key pieces for folks as we're wrapping up.
I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. I think first off, this is new for Pomona, as it is with many cities, but a lot of the panelists on the call in the cities we're talking to have kind of served as our role models, so to speak, of what's happening. And so it's funny, as you go deeper into it, it's just like everything that everybody's saying here are questions that have come up in Pomona as well. And so it's, in a way, it's a very universal challenge of parklet implementation. So I think, thinking of Glendora or even Laverne and some of our neighbors, some regional considerations, like with the gold line, it's going to become quite interesting to connect quick build to how we do have like a continuous kind of philosophy of quick build on a regional level to really approach regional transportation and active transportation. So that's going to be a fun conversation, I think, to have to kind of broaden beyond parklets. And then I think the other thing is, one thing that was interesting when that question came up about visibility of storefronts is trying to retrain our mind into that's only a problem if the receptor is a vehicle driving by and you want them to see the storefront. But it's not a problem if you're a pedestrian or a cyclist. That challenge where there's a lot of apprehension about going back to a pedestrian mall, which it was in the 60s, and even just so that 15 cars can park there. And that's why we had to reopen it. And so, to Stephen's point, it would take a lot of kind of evangelism or evangelical training on the part of planning staff to really coach councils and communities on some of the value of thinking about multimodal so that it's not a shock to the system when it does happen.
Yeah, I would say in our experience here, as I mentioned in my little piece is, take risks, be aggressive. There's a lot of money that cities have that I don't think people realize. And this is really for our LA County listeners, not for those outside of LA County. We have a lot of local return money that we get that's very flexible that can be used for these projects. So, be creative with your funding. Your finance team is there to help you. I mean, I think that's one thing that we've learned too is, getting every kind of cog in the machine working is a really great way to get these done seamlessly. And yeah, this has been a great way to put a bike lane down and, if someone gets really angry, say, oh, it's only temporary, don't worry, we're just learning. And so, this is the time to take risks and be bold. So absolutely, this is do it now if you're going to do it.
I agree with everything that Ata and Stephen just mentioned. I just want to say that we're fortunate that we have a very progressive council that really strive to multimodal. So we didn't really have issues from that perspective. Some neighborhoods have mixed feelings, and that's why we go above and beyond in consultation. Most agencies now have some forms of these quick builds, but if you don't need to start from scratch. If I want to mention one thing, it would be to please reach out to all of us, to all of the agencies that implemented similar applications, and take whatever you want out of the developed guidelines, out of the developed standards, and save yourself some time. I tried in my presentation to share our experience, good and bad, but please reach out if you need anything, and I'm sure that's the case for all other presenters.
Yeah, that's great. And, just to piggyback off that, I would definitely say, please feel free to reach out to, Skag as well, myself. I'll type in my email in the chat. Any questions, I can help try to facilitate. Happy to do that. If you have any suggestions for follow-up toolbox trainings or on a different topic, we're always happy to host. We want to, make sure that these are as useful as possible for folks. And it's great that we're getting kind of a wider audience now, even outside of Southern California in our sort of Skag region. I think that's such a wonderful thing. So, if there's any other last words, Ricardo or Sam, if you have anything to share, please feel free, or we can also wrap up. We have about just a couple of minutes left.
I'll take 1 minute for a quick wrap up.
Yeah.
I think it's what everyone's been saying, but it's like, I don't think there certainly are some best practices here, and I think we want to follow the best practices, but we also don't know all the answers. And I think the beauty of quick build is that we're learning as we go. And like Steve just said, be bold, take risks. I mean, certainly, I liked what Anna said too, which is make sure you're covering your bases and, you're consulting with your risk manager and your engineers. And we want, obviously, safety is critical, but this is a great opportunity to really advance your strategic goals and advance, network goals and many of your approved transportation plans. And I guess the final quote I would leave everyone with is, I always love the one, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So this is a great way, get it good, and it's probably good enough. And then it's an iterative process. And as we go through, we're learning and making changes and tweaks and modifications. I think that's one common theme that we've heard from all the panelists, is that quick build provides that great opportunity to be flexible, to be nimble, to respond to comments from the public and make changes and modifications to make sure that we're improving it, sort of each and every day. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. All right. And so thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. As we mentioned in the beginning, we'll be posting all these presentations on our website. I just entered in my email into the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And again, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.
Everyone, thank you.